If I, as a person, am composed solely of atoms, and all of these atoms are exchanged with my environment over a period of time, what gives me as a person identity?
That's the problem of identity across time, or personal identity across time. There actually is a great comedy in which a debtor attempts to argue that he isn't the person who contracted the debt because he's composed of different matter from that person. And indeed, if you believe, like Plato or Descartes, that we're immaterial things, it is easier to account for our identity across time than if you believe, as I do, that we are living animals, material things. Still, we're not just any old material things. Bits of matter don't leave our systems or come to be parts of our system by being stuck onto us or being pulled off us, not very frequently. Anyway, we assimilate them. Our systems are designed to take in new matter and impress an already existent form on it. And I believe that that is the way animals persist through time, by having a plan that's inherent in the animal's physical structure and impressing the requirements of that plan on new matter that's taken in. I think then that animals are things that can change their parts and in fact can undergo and survive a complete replacement of their parts. The parts in question being atoms, large organic molecules, things too small to see. I'm not talking about replacing fingers or toes. That's an interesting question too, but the parts I'm talking about at present are molecules.
Do we distinguish between a human person and a human organism?
Well, you certainly could. Of course, it depends what you believe. If you're René Descartes, for example, you think that the human person is an immaterial thing that causes things to happen in the human organism, which he would call the human body. Mm-hmm. If you take the position that I take, that is simply the position that the human person and the human organism are identical, that I am the very same thing as this living organism that's right here.
You've used something called the duplication argument to support that position. How does that work?
It's not so much that I bring this argument forward in support of that work as I ask people to consider it to see what they really think. We're familiar, those of us who've wasted time reading science fiction, with the perfect duplicating machine. As you put any perfect duplicate, any object into the machine, and on the other side, after you press the big red button, there appears an atom for atom perfect duplicate of it. So suppose we have one of these machines, and suppose it is a dynamic duplicator as well as a static duplicator. For example, if you put a marble on the in tray and roll it, then what appears on the out tray will be a marble rolling in the same direction with the same speed. So then all the atoms that are produced in the duplicate will be in the same dynamical states of all the atoms as their counterparts in the original. Now, if we put a cheese sandwich there, I'm sure everybody will agree we'll get a cheese sandwich that we could eat. What about a simple living thing like a bacterium? Would it wriggle around in the fluid? I should think so. A bacterium is a complicated biochemical machine. Now we can move up the biological hierarchy, the great chain of biological being. We can have a beetle, a mouse, and so on. I would think the mouse would be alive and behave just like the original mouse. If you'd taught the original mouse to find its way through a certain maze, the duplicate ought to be just as good at doing that. In fact, nobody could tell the two mice apart. Mm-hmm. Then what happens if you put a human being there? I would think that you would get a human being that would believe that he was the original, that nobody, not if it's a man, not his wife, not his confessor, not his psychiatrist, not his best friend, nobody could tell him from the original. If you scrambled him in the original in one of those barrels that they have at the funhouse at the fair, then nobody would know which was the original.
Including
I don't
them.
ask people to, including them. After all, they both think they're the original. I wonder, I don't claim that people should believe that this is what the outcome of the story should be. I'm just saying, if you consider the story and you do believe that that's what the outcome is, then shouldn't you, like me, say that the person is identical with a living organism? If you think a person isn't identical with the living organism, I'd expect you should think that there should be some other outcome to this story.
And how you determine that would give your understanding of how you maintain physical identity, because what you've now done in the duplication of these parts is to create two physical identities.
That's right. They're two different people. Certainly, if you stick a pin in one, only one of them feels pain. There's two people there now. In the science fiction stories, sometimes they each professes to believe something like he and the other are the same person or something like that, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense. As I say, if you stick a pin in one, one feels pain and the other doesn't, so there must be two people there.
Now, you believe in God, and you believe that ultimately there will be a resurrection of the dead.
Mm-hmm.
How do you maintain a personal identity if the only identity we have are the changing of the parts of the physical body, which ultimately then will disintegrate?
Well, that's certainly a very good question. You can't, certainly God, even God couldn't do it by just looking back in time, seeing how the atoms were arranged in the dead person just before he died, then arranging some atoms so as to make a perfect duplicate, and then perhaps fixing up whatever led the person to be about to die. That wouldn't work, because if he could do it with one person, he could do it with two people. It wouldn't help him to use the same matter that had composed, to find all those atoms again and rearrange the same one, because 10 years before, the person was made of completely different atoms.
And 1 second before, it was a few atoms difference.
Mm-hmm. But there would be there'd be an almost completely different set of atoms
Sure.
10 years before. If God could resurrect Socrates as he was at 70, and when he died using exactly the same atoms, he could, of course, go back and find the atoms that composed Socrates when he was 60, arrange them just as they were when Socrates was 60. Then he'd have these two guys here, one of which thought he was Socrates about to drink the hemlock, one of which thought he was Socrates from 10 years before that. I would suppose, though, that neither of them could really be. Each would have an equally good claim to be Socrates. It would seem that both of them are Socrates or neither, and since not both, neither. So just rearrangement and recollection certainly wouldn't be enough. God wouldn't have to do this by ensuring some kind of continuity, which certainly doesn't seem to be visibly present, particularly in the case in which a person is cremated, or even worse, say, vaporized by being present when a hydrogen bomb goes off. But I would have to assume that God's resources, since he's omnipotent, are unlimited and may include things I don't understand. St. Paul, when someone asks him this question, this is recorded in 1 Corinthians, somebody says, by what means does the resurrection come? And first of all, Paul says, you fool. But he does proceed to answer the question, and he says that something survives of the original person. There's no dualism, here in St. Paul. There's no talk about, there's talk using the word psyche, which is often translated soul, but he doesn't seem to mean it in any Platonic or Cartesian sense. He says there's a gymnos caucus, a bare kernel of the original person that survives, and it seems to be something material. That's about the only thing that Revelation, as I see it, has to tell us on the subject. So I assume that an omnipotent being somehow achieves some sort of material continuity between the resurrected person and the dead person, which is identity preserving.
And this continuity, though, is not just reconstituting atoms. It has to be something different.
No, that wouldn't be. That's really, if you think about it.
Well, what else can be material if it's not reconstituting atoms?
There may be features to the material world that we don't understand. I can tell you theological science fiction stories about what happens. I mean, here's something God could do. He could, so the person's corpse is lying there. God replaces the corpse with a simulacrum, takes the corpse and keeps it safe until it's time for the resurrection. That would be consistent with appearances. Now, I don't suppose that is what God does, but it shows that the doctrine is logically consistent with what we observe. He could similarly take some part of it and do that, perhaps even some very small part. Certainly the brain would be enough, right? We all seem today to believe that if you take your brain out of your body and then put it in another body that's still you, that's part of our worldview today, a worldview that I share. But who knows what avenues are open to material being? Maybe space and time are much different from what we think. I mean, look what we learn about wormholes and so on, about the possible causal contact between two widely separated points in time. Immediate causal contact between two widely separated points in time. I don't claim that that's involved either. It just shows that the universe is a more complicated place than we think. So I don't see any reason to think that this is impossible. It's just how it would be accomplished is not clear to us. But then so many things about the purely natural world, revelation apart, are not clear to us anyway. Lots of things that we don't understand. One would expect revelation to include some things that we don't understand as well.